I'm Dr. Katharina Motyl. I'm an assistant professor of American Studies at the University of Mannheim, that's in southwest Germany, close to Frankfurt. And I have various research interests, but recently thought that digital anti-feminism deserves some critical attention per se, but also because I had a hunch that it functioned sort of as an entry drug into radicalization towards alt-right ideologies at large. Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you for writing the piece. It's called, just for our notes, From Feminist Lies to White Replacement, Digital Anti-Feminist Forums as Spaces of Collective Radicalization. So I'd love for you to tell us more about your thinking about, or thinking how you came to pick up on anti-feminism and why it became a focus of your research here.
Okay. So my focus is on the United States, but there seems to be a dynamics transnationally that anti-feminist and anti-gender politics are making inroads in Europe as well. I mentioned this in the article. So several EU members, actually Poland and Hungary, recently passed, in the case of Poland, a very restrictive abortion policy. Hungary has anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. And so I thought that this topic deserved attention. And I mean, obviously, in 2016, a major misogynist was elected US president, and that occurred again last fall. And so my hunch was that this obviously doesn't happen in a vacuum, and that digital media logics have a role to play in this proliferation of anti-feminist and anti-gender positions, which, let's face it, have become part of the political agenda of major parties in Western democracies, not just in the US, but as I said again, also in Europe.
Yeah, and thank you for tying this to the white replacement theory and kind of the ideas of white supremacy, because I think that it is a pipeline, correct, as you clearly state. But I think there's a couple really profound statements in the article that I want to get to eventually. But one of them is this idea that that part of the project is to bring some sort of pleasure to the person who's hating. And then secondly is this idea that to gain political authentication or some sort of a politician needs to have been accused of some sort of sexual misconduct. And I think that that's what's play out right now. But before we get into all of those 2 points, I'd like to back up and talk about what the anti-feminist landscape looks like, because I think to some people who might be hearing this, it's the first time they're coming up against some of these ideas. So could you unpack for us what the anti-feminists believe, and then we'll get into like how they manifest that online?
Sure. The term that media researchers use to characterize anti-feminist groups online is the manosphere. And this, very interestingly, was originally a name that was chosen by anti-feminists for themselves, right? It was first published in a blog post a blog from 2009, and then in the book The Manosphere, A New Hope for Masculinity, Ian Ironwood made this term more prominent in 2013, and now it's not only any longer a self-description, but it's also being used analytically by media researchers. And we can say that the manosphere is basically comprised of four major groups. The first is innocuously titled Men's Rights and Fathers' Rights. And why do I say it's innocuous? When you actually check out these forums, for example, on subreddit, Men's Rights Group, they are fairly extreme. And the problem with this particular group is that obviously men are entitled to rights and fathers are entitled to rights. But what these alt-right agitators have managed to do is merge these, how should we say, legitimate concerns with fairly extreme anti-feminist and misogynist content. So this would be the first group, Men's Rights and Fathers' Rights group. Then there's pickup artists, or they're abbreviated as PUAs. This was founded by Rush V, also in the aughts. And on these forums, men exchange advice on how to get game, if you wish, how to pick up women. Then there's a group that most of your constituency will have heard about, namely incels, right? That's short for involuntary celibates. So these are straight men who vent online about women's refusal to have sexual relations with them, and they believe that they're entitled to sexual services, sexual relations with women. And there's actually, or should I say before the current administration was inaugurated, there were significant efforts on the parts of some agencies and also US states whether incels should be labeled a terrorist organization, because several terrorist attacks or massacres have been linked to incel agitators. So for example, Elliot Rodger, who killed 6 people and injured 14 near the UC Santa Barbara campus in 2014, had uploaded a manifesto in which he made known his incel ideology. And then there's a fourth group. The acronym is MGTOW, and this actually stands for Men Going Their Own Way. And this group comprises straight male separatists who avoid romantic or sexual relationships with women in protest against a culture that is allegedly poisoned by feminism. And you can reach various levels of MGTOW, and the highest level is basically where the straight man completely disengages from a society that is allegedly poisoned by feminism.
Yeah, and one of the striking through lines of all this seems to be lack of sexual agency on men's part. The fact that they are unable to obtain a partner, have meaningful relationships with women, leads to this very twisted idea of what feminism's goals are. And when we think of feminism writ large, it's the empowerment of women, but they've twisted it to mean other things. So could you talk about how they view feminism and why they feel that they're justified in standing against it?
Okay. these four groups that I just outlined, they're united in their anti-feminist outlook. They allege that Western societies are poisoned by feminism. They actually have this term state feminism. And so they think, or at least proclaim, that Western societies today discriminate against men. They give such cases ranging from circumcision of male babies, which they read as an violation of these male babies' bodily autonomy, to alimony cases alleging that family courts, I hope that's the correct term in English, so when a couple gets a divorce and there's a custody to be disputed over, that courts systematically discriminate against men, either do not grant men custody or joint custody, ask men to pay too much alimony, and all this. And then another important point is that they say, they allege that women systematically use allegations of sexual assault to ruin a specific man's career or life. And the question you posed first, I think, is quite a complex one. So why do they feel that way? And I think one thing is clear, gender relations and the way that Western societies are organized have changed very much since the 1950s, right? Most Western women, I guess that's safe to say, will not be happy to be subordinated to their partners in terms of hierarchy in the relationship or in the family. Men are no longer, or usually no longer, the sole providers. Of course, then the sexual revolution of the 1960s happened, and this gave women a lot of choice. And choice is an interesting term here, and not just choice in the sense of deciding whether they want to get pregnant or go through with a pregnancy, but also in terms of how do they want to live their life. Do they want to be in the workforce? And then, of course, also dating and marriage. And so, let's say an answer that many researchers will give as to why anti-feminism has become so popular to many male users over the last years is that they say men are experiencing insecurity. And basically, it's this doubling of masculinity, and perhaps we can already say white masculinity no longer affords the same amount of privileges it did in the 1950s, although I think we should probably say there is still such a thing as white privilege and male privilege. And then, of course, parallel to this transformation of gender relations and the sexual revolutions, which I already mentioned, we have neoliberalism, so that also many, let's say, blue-collar men who still experienced job security up until, let's say, the 1960s or 70s, are struggling to make ends meet. So we have this doubling of gender insecurity, no longer knowing their place in terms of gender relations, and then on top this economic insecurity. I know I've already spoken a lot, but let me add one more thing. I think, though, it's very important to recognize that it's not only men from, let's say, lower socioeconomic backgrounds who are attracted to anti-feminism, but I guess Donald Trump is the best example, right? There's someone from a very privileged economic background who's also a blatant misogynist. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, because that's a good overlay of kind of the issues at hand. And I think I want to get into, because misogyny's always been with us. It's a hallmark of Western civilization, but the internet changed everything. It's a cliche that we hear all the time, but it really did change how this sort of rhetoric and ideology manifests and also spreads. So could you talk about how the internet has become a very fertile ground for these sorts of ideas of the incels, all the people with pickup artists, and why it's so effective on the internet?
Okay. So this is actually a great question, John. I get that a lot when I'm giving presentations, and, me being located in Germany, some colleagues will say, oh, look at the Nazis. This was all about misogyny, right? A very traditional family image, nuclear family, coupled with white nationalism. And as you said, misogyny is unfortunately a through line in Western civilization. But while anti-feminists online are usually also misogynist, I really think sort of what's new is this idea that feminism is a state-sponsored ideology that elites buy into, right? I mean, this sort of argument has second wave feminism in the 1960s as its necessary precondition. And then, importantly, as you said, the advent of the Web 2.0 in the aughts really changed things. And I'll try to keep this brief. So the first aspect is that the Web 2.0 affords anonymity. And it is quite another thing calling a woman who is supposedly a feminist horrible insults to her face, or disparaging another user online, and while also the user themselves remains online, right? It's not that their friends and neighbors are going to find out. The second thing is really that networked harassment. There are the media studies scholars Alice E. Marwick and Robin Kaplan. They really make that point that during Gamergate, so this controversy in 2014 and 15, which is considered a watershed moment in the rise of the alt-right, that anti-feminist gamers devised networked harassment, right? This starts with doxing, so publishing personal information online of feminists, or let's say women who have alleged sexual assault, to spreading so-called revenge porn or social shaming, these kinds of things. So this was a technique that was being pioneered by anti-feminist gamers, and it has, strange metaphor, but bloomed really into a strategy that is commonly used by right-wing populists. I mean, of course, it's not only right-wing populists who use doxing, but also users with different political ideologies. But it's very important to recognize the anti-feminist root of this. And then I would say one thing that has changed also is sort of the interwovenness of online discourses with the political process, in the sense of debates in Congress or in parliaments. I'm not even sure it makes sense to speak of offline spaces, because are we ever really offline in the year 2025? But so we can really say that through this interwovenness and this adoption of these discursive logics of the internet by political actors, anti-feminism has really moved from the fringes of the internet, right? So the early days were really obscure platform message boards and image boards such as 4chan to now Donald Trump, the US president, or Viktor Orban, the head of state of Hungary, spreading this kind of ideology, and the political campaigns that they run, they're of course active online, and they use these techniques which anti-feminists pioneered online very effectively for political organizing or for intimidation of their, well, shall we say, political adversary, or at least political opponents. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because you bring up Donald Trump and Elon Musk has to be included in this, is that so much of online discourse used to be disqualifying. Like people were so afraid of being doxxed as a anti-feminist or a misogynist or a racist. But it seems like today there's a tactic they used to shield themselves in humor and plausible deniability, and I was just making a joke, I'm just trying to own the libs, why are you taking this so seriously? And that kind of falls into red pilling, which I think a lot of people have heard the term now. But there are specific tactics that distance even the people who believe this from accountability. So
right.
Talk about some of those tactics and why they're effective.
Yes. This anti-feminist vanguard, as I would call it, of the alt-right, first, let's say, made memes a thing, right? And so memes work via irony, they work via exaggeration. And it seems that at some point, the irony gets lost, right? So irony, okay, I'm a literary critic, forgive me, I can't help it. The definition of irony is one says the exact opposite of what one means, right? And so, again, using irony and humor, I wasn't really being racist. Can't you take a joke? But it seems at some point in the trajectory, the humor gets lost, and what may originally have started as a supposedly humorous meme with racist and or misogynist undertones is then stated as a serious statement or policy even. And what's also interesting to observe, and it's really that this radicalization, so you have to hand it to the extreme right. They have an extremely effective media strategy. And what you will see also in this, luring in, let's say my prime example is, maybe a guy in his mid-20s. He's had a job setback. A woman got the promotion that he coveted, or he just has, a lack of success dating and has this feeling, well, something isn't right. Yeah. And so you scroll through the internet, and then on a platform such as Facebook or X, right, he finds content he finds funny. Then he notices, this is same user who has posted these 4 posts. Let me check out his page, right? And then it says, also follow my Telegram channel. And so this kind of luring in really works with Heather Suzanne Woods, a media studies scholar in Kansas, calls this more palatable means. What she means by this, it's perhaps more humorous. It's not undeniably racist or misogynist, right? And then the user immerses himself in more specialized anti-feminist forums, for example, Telegram channel, or these forums on Reddit. And then he encounters more extreme views. And is perhaps additionally, even though his primary beef may have been with women, then also made to question, and wait, isn't racial justice also just suggesting that racial minorities are being discriminated against? What about me? I live in Appalachia. I don't have the same economic opportunities as, I don't know, some Asian American. So long story short, they have a very effective and multifaceted media strategy. And what Heather Suzanne Woods also points out is that obviously online discourse is always invites or is open for inviting counter responses, but the alt-right seems to be very well organized so that whenever some leftist actor or social justice activist, appropriates one of their means and resignifies it and seeks to change their meaning, there's basically an army of online activists who, reappropriate it for alt-right content. And you don't see the same level of organization, really, and also media savviness on the leftist political spectrum. It is, I think, perhaps I'm overstating my case, you tell me, but I think with right-wing groups, they have this, in German it's called Führerprinzip, right? They always have this idea of strong leadership. And I think the left is and has always been more fragmented. And you also see this in terms of social media campaigns. Yeah,
and also there's I guess the idea that you bring in later in the article about if you're feeling disassociated from mainstream society, these memes give you and also this community gives you a positive identification with a group of people who feel like you and also are in on the joke. So, like when Elon Musk gives the Nazi salute, and then everyone says that's a Nazi salute, and doubles down and posts Nazi jokes, that is seen as making all of his fans bust out laughing. And while the rest of us are horrified, they see it as something else. And it's this secret knowledge, it's this kind of subversive intention, which, oh, we know he's not serious, but is he? And it's that kind of. So could you talk about both? Well, let's first talk about the identification, the positivity that comes out of the.
Yes. So far, I think in research on why do people, or shall we say, white men turn to the manosphere and white nationalism, let's say two explanatory models are seen as central. The first, I already mentioned this, gendered and or economic insecurity is experienced by these men. They misidentify the source of their oppression, right? You can't get at those who are responsible for neoliberalism. So, right, it's your African American neighbor or your female co-worker who did you in. And the second explanatory model is that some users seem to revel in hating, right? And in being mean, being full of venom. And then another German colleague of mine, Simon Strick, actually made this very important intervention in his book. It's unfortunately only available in German, Rechte Gefühle, so the feelings of the right. And he had this observation, and he did meticulous empirical research, really documenting, downloading memes and posts. And so what he found is that parts of the manosphere or parts of white nationalism allow users to experience positive feelings by giving them sources of identification, right? So, for example, it's okay to be a man, right? Or white pride. And of course, when you say, or when I say white pride, these Nazis with shaved head and swastika tattoos come to mind. And of course, that's there. And I'm not saying that less extreme alt-righters are less of a problem, but there seems to be this strategy really that, anti-feminist or white nationalist influencer, there's this very interesting case of the Golden One. He's a Swedish bodybuilder, but also a member of a fascist party, right? And he has these influencer videos where he's telling followers to, love your people or, embrace your heritage. And I think this is actually important. I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm obviously not condemning political correctness. I think political correctness is important, but I think parts of U.S. society, and we see it here in Germany as well, with the election results we had a couple of weeks ago on the federal level. The extreme right is on the rise again, and part of what it does, it makes it okay to be white and proud of your heritage. It makes it okay to be a man and proud to be a man. And I think this is a crucial insight that has to be taken into consideration along with these other two models. I don't think any one model really accounts for this complex phenomenon of the rise of the extreme right in the US and in the EU. But taking the three together is, I think, how one arrives at the core. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, and just to kind of put a pin on that, emphasize it a little bit, is that the idea that they're fighting against what they see as the corruption, right? And so when you say they're taking pride in their white culture, it's because white culture is under attack. It's not just taking pride in who they are. They're saying we have to stop the great replacement. We have to stop white women from having brown babies. We have to, because we're under attack as white men. And part of that attack is not only white women, but also everyone who isn't white. So could we get now into like the actual white nationalism that comes out of this feminism, and how, you make a really convincing point about cuckolds and cucking and all that kind of thing, and the anti-porn, which I think is a strange bedfellow.
Yeah, that's an interesting. So what I've tried to do is really try to identify, so what kind of narratives is the alt-right using to represent white nationalism as, let's say, causally linked to anti-feminism, right? So if you have a problem with feminism, the idea is you also have to have a problem with white replacement. And so the first narrative is that there is a need to police white women's sexuality so that they have children, and this is in order to secure the survival of the white race. Again, this can be in the article here. I have a meme. This agenda can appear quite innocuously in the form of a meme. Here's a meme of a white lady holding a white baby in a field of red poppies, and the caption is "White women of childbearing age, 2% of the world's population, gotta save the minorities," right? So on the one hand, we find sort of this wink, wink appropriation of the leftist, this ironization of the leftist agenda of minority protection. And then it's sort of free floating. I think the meme allows those who see it online to associate its agenda with quite a few policies. In my view, most importantly, the idea that a woman's right to choose needs to be either greatly infringed upon or completely abolished. The second narrative, I think, is the least surprising of them all. Right? It's the same old spiel of male migrants or men of color stealing white women who allegedly rightfully belong to white men. And then, right, together, those two constituents allegedly commit miscegenation. And this is, of course, a problem because the US is then facing the so-called mongrel nation. And and we see this actually a lot in Germany, perhaps more so than in the US, with surrounding discourses about male refugees from Syria and Afghanistan, right? The extreme right in Germany calls them rape refugees. So this idea that, they come into our country, they're getting asylum, most of them probably don't even deserve it, and then they come and steal, or at worst rape our women. And perhaps this is also, before I come to the last, most interesting narrative, namely the opposition to pornography, this is perhaps also a good time to remark on something that's very counterintuitive at first glance, namely, even though nationalism has the nation as its basis, right? We know this very much from Germany's history of Nazi Germany, right? So the people and the nation conceptualized as belonging together. Of course, you have nationalists in the US, nationalists in Poland. They, interestingly enough, network transnationally, which, if you think about it, it seems to be a logical contradiction. But I think the stand-in really here then is it's no longer the nation in terms of the nation state, so all Germans or all Americans, but race, the white race comes to replace this. And so this is how it's possible that white nationalists in Germany collaborate with white nationalists in the United States. If you have this transnational circulation of alt-right ideologies, it's because it's now about staving off white replacement in European or European-derived settler nations, let's say. Okay, but now on to the third prominent narrative that fuses anti-feminism and white nationalism, and it's astoundingly an opposition to pornography. For those of your constituents who don't believe me, the many chapters of the Proud Boys have a so-called, excuse my French, no wanks agenda, where a new member has to pledge to abstain from watching porn and from masturbation. And the idea is that consuming porn and masturbating channels sexual energy or energy in generally that a white user had better invest in finding a female partner of European descent, a white partner with whom to procreate in order to secure the survival of the white race. And I don't know if you're aware of this insanity that Elon Musk has recently posted. I mean, he posts so much, you hardly keep up with it, where he says, underpopulation is a larger threat to civilization than global warming. And he has 12 children. He says, proud to do my part to stave off this problem, right? And as ridiculous as it sounds, it's part of the agenda, right? So in opposition to pornography and masturbation, but not out of the same reason than second wave feminists abhorred pornography, namely that it's a misogynist industry that objectifies women and all that, but so that the male user invests this energy into finding a white partner to stave off white replacement and to make sure that many white babies are being born. Yeah, those are the three narratives that I could identify.
And I've always heard that pornography is a Jewish plot to corrupt the Aryan kind of white civilization.
Yes. So this is actually, thank you, John, for bringing that up. So this is one of the examples, so in particularly extreme content. That is not to say that alt-right content is not pretty hard to stomach per se, but let's say in particularly extreme iterations, pornography is linked to the idea of a Jewish world conspiracy. And for example, there is a meme that shows is it called organograms, I think, of the media company MindGeek, which is a parent company of several porn streaming websites, among them Pornhub, which is among the most heavily trafficked websites online today. And in this meme above the organigram of MindGeek, a stereotypical depiction of a Jewish man hovers. And so here the idea is that Jewish individuals spread so-called degeneracy in Western societies and spread pornography, again, to weaken European or majority white nations, and to lead to the so-called mongrelization of the US or of Germany.
Yeah, I mean, it always seems to come back to sex and then a Jewish conspiracy. So it's just always been, unfortunately, that's always been the end result of all of this kind of movement towards great replacement is always ending there. I would like to talk about how you brought up Elon Musk and having the babies, and there's a Christian group called the Quiverfuls who try to have as many babies, at least 12, for each one is an arrow for God, and it's, spreading the evangelical worldview of this group. But there's a real disconnect between having a baby and being a father. And there's this idea that the alpha males, the high quality males like Elon Musk, have the babies, and then the liberal, weaker men have to raise them. And how does that work in this whole conception? Because it seems like fatherhood should be the ultimate goal of these groups, but it isn't. There's sexual conquest is the goal, not responsibility and social. You understand what I'm saying? Like if they.
I understand what I understand what you're saying. I was unfamiliar with the group you first mentioned, but I think for once, right? Why would fathers have to take responsibility if they believe in the nuclear family, right? It's the woman's role to be at home, whatever, prepare the meals, rear the children, and then men obviously have more important things to do. What I find quite interesting is that in these in the manosphere, you have actually a lot of talk of the alpha male versus the beta male. And users often identify as beta males. And they're saying such things as women like to, again, excuse my French, ride the cock carousel in their 20s, be sexually promiscuous with alpha males. So whatever, good looking or sexually attractive men then have their babies, the alpha male takes off, right? And then these women are turning to the beta males whom they rejected in high school, and who are now the poor sods tasked with paying for these children they didn't even father. To be honest, John, I don't see the connection between those two examples, but then again, I really don't think these anti-feminist ideologies are necessarily always thought through to the end, right? So these two conceptions can coexist, I guess.
Well, and I think that that's part of the appeal too, is that there's a disconnect, and there's a contradiction there that can be filled in by personal experience, personal grievance, personal identification. And I kind of want to end on this idea that you bring up in the paper a couple of times, that in order to have political to be a real man in politics, you have to have been accused of some sort of sexual misconduct. And in the Trump cabinet right now, almost everyone it's uncanny how he's been able to find people, men in particular, who have been accused of misconduct, affairs, assault, all sorts of things. And can you explain why that isn't a disqualification to these this group and also to people who are on the far right?
Yeah, to me, this is almost, let's say, a joke. This almost sounds like a joke lefties might make, but oh, can he even appoint someone to his cabinet who's male and not been accused of sexual misconduct? But the sad truth is, well, not only is it true numerically speaking with this, what is it, Secretary of Defense? Hey, yeah. But on these online fora, you find content that really celebrates sexual misconduct and specifically investigation by the state or, let's say, criminal justice system of sexual misconduct of a man, right? So this was in 2016. A moderator of a forum on Reddit posted this, seeking to basically get users of his forum to vote, right? It was a get out a vote campaign. And he says, sexual assault is why I'm endorsing Donald Trump for US president. And his line of argumentation was there is no truer sign what side somebody's on than when he's giving a bogus accusation by the establishment of sexual assault. So again, here, this idea that the elites, however amorphously defined that is, the elites are in cahoots with feminism. They're in cahoots against your everyday Joe. And then consequently, if the establishment or the criminal justice system accuses a man of sexual misconduct, that is actually a badge of honor or a badge of, let's say, political authenticity or getting it right politically. Yeah, it's obviously very concerning, but that's certainly what seems to be it seems to be a prerequisite for getting appointed to Donald Trump's cabinet, let's say.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that this is one of those topics that more people are curious about and worried about than the information is necessarily out there. So thank you for your work on this. And I know this is an unfair question, but do you see any way that this manosphere kind of creep into the mainstream can be stopped or countered in a way that is effective?
I'm getting that question a lot, and it's of course an excellent and very relevant question. Well, one hope I would have looking at history, right, like in the 1950s, McCarthyism was, and this anti-communist witch hunt was mainstream in the US. And then it reached overkill. And at some point, Senator McCarthy fell into disrepute, and the House Un-American Activities Committee was being dismantled. So it may sound terribly naive because, if you look at the demographic breakdown of who voted for Trump in November of last year, it's very concerning because he's made significant inroads with Latino men, with African American men. White women still voted for him in great numbers. So perhaps what I'm about to say is naive, but gender is everywhere, right? It's really all of us have some sort of gender identity. Our everyday interactions are marked by it. And if these policies continue or even magnified of curbing abortion rights, of discrediting LGBTQ plus individuals, and actually outright making the life of trans people miserable, right? And we all, even if we're not trans ourselves or queer ourselves, we have a queer friend, we may have a trans niece. And so if that would be my one hope, that at some point it just reaches overkill and the idea is enough is enough. And my other hope is that really those who are teenagers now or in their early 20s will have a different political agenda. I mean, so I'm a university professor. I teach kids who are in their early 20s, and gender is hugely important to them. I mean, my class this semester on queer literature before and after Stonewall was like completely overbooked. And that would be my other hope, actually, is that these students or young people who don't remember the political process before Me Too, who have a very different relationship to gender than me, who was born in the early 80s, that they will bring political change. It is definitely my great hope.